KDKR Decatur, Dallas, Fort Worth, KYJC Commerce, and KMWC Bethany. On the web at kdkr.org and on all your devices with the Live 365 app. Portions of KDKR programming do not necessarily reflect the views of this station, its management, or staff.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.
Well, what do you do when blank happens? Today's step-by-step instructions when car failure happens. Stay tuned to the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Good afternoon, this is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. Tony Joe's with me as he is every Friday to take your Car Corner questions. I have a number for you and a line open if you got a question for Tony Joe. 1-877-913-5357. 1-877-913-5357. If you don't have a car question, but you got a question for me, I'm going to direct you to the website, www.prudentmoney.com. And if you've got a question, send it in. You'll see a link at the top of the web page, and we'll get you taken care of. That easy. 1-877-913-5357. So, Tony Joe, how's it going?
I am well. I am rolling, Bob.
You're rolling.
How are you?
I'm scared to ask what you mean by that.
It's Friday.
Yeah.
It's the end of the week.
This is good. This is good.
For you, and, you know, you're always in a good mood on Friday. I see it's casual Friday.
Yes.
That's okay.
So what's rolling have to do with it?
It's just an expression. You know,
just an expression.
Doing well.
So you've patiently waited since February.
Oh,
and
man.
it's here. Football season.
I am so excited.
I'm sure you watched some of last night's game.
I did.
Correct?
Season started last night.
Well, so what's the prediction for Sunday? Maybe we should start getting your predictions.
Let me ask you something. There's a game on tonight. Are you familiar with that?
It's in Brazil.
Yeah. Is that in Brazil? And it's the Packers and who?
Philadelphia.
Oh.
It should be a good game.
That's kind of, Friday night game like that. That's kind of weird, but I didn't know it until a little while ago. There's a game on tonight.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's on TV. I think it's on streaming. So you have a subscription. I wish they wouldn't do that.
What is that? Do I have that?
Probably not. I mean, we're lucky for you to have a cell phone.
So I'm basically not going to be able to watch that game.
It's Peacock.
I don't know what that is, but
you can sign up for it. It costs you $10 a month or something like that. So I just wish they wouldn't do that. I know there's a lot of money in what they're wanting to do with all those TV deals, but man.
Well, I would like to say one thing, as I do every year before the season begins, the official season, that is, not counting preseason games. But, at this point, the one expression I enjoy more than anything, ask me about the Cowboys on Sunday.
How about the Cowboys on Sunday?
Oh, you mean the undefeated Dallas Cowboys? You mean that team?
Oh, it never gets old. 1-877-913-5357. I think we'll get a rush of calls in just to hear something different. 1-877-913-5357. So we started this show topic last time that you were here, which was a couple weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And what do you do when blank happens? I mean, the list is such a long list. I was kind of reading through this earlier, and I thought to myself, I don't know what I would do if that happened, or if that happened.
Most people don't. But...
So let's start with an easy one.
Okay.
But once again, it happens. You're stuck in traffic. I mean, the worst case scenario, you're stuck in traffic. You can't really move. Your car is overheating.
Mm-hmm.
So. I think we touched on this maybe towards the end of a couple weeks ago, but I think it's worth revisiting.
Okay. So you're saying you're stuck, you're like in heavy traffic, bumper to bumper traffic, your car starts to overheat. Is that it?
Yeah, or we could say that's worst case scenario. Let's just say you're driving along and you start to see your car overheat. What's it mean? What do you
Okay.
do?
Well, here's what you want to know about the car, first of all, is the engine generates heat that is carried away by the cooling system out into the atmosphere. It does this through the radiator. It carries all the coolant that's hot from the engine, and the water pump pumps it into the radiator where it is then cooled down and dissipated through the air, outside air. So if it overheats or starts to overheat, you're in traffic or not, and you just need to get someplace safe. What you can do to buy yourself time, this does not fix your problem, but it buys you time, and that's dissipate the heat someplace extra besides the radiator, and you have the advantage of having a heater core. Unfortunately, it's under the dash, but it will dissipate heat. It's like another little radiator that will get rid of some of that heat. So even though you don't want to, here's what you can do to buy yourself time. Shut the air conditioner off, turn on the heater, full blast. You can watch that temperature gauge probably drop back down to the normal range.
Will it really drop that much?
Yeah, it'll go back to normal for a while.
Like what's?
Well, it depends on the size of the, like some
yeah.
cars have bigger engines and they have more water and more coolant. So, but it can buy you 5-7 minutes of time to where you can exit the highway or get to a parking lot or get home, maybe if you're close to home, someplace safe. And the reason you want to do that, even though it seems like an uncomfortable situation and an extreme thing to do, you want to prevent seeing that needle up there in the hot range. That needle gets up there to H. With aluminum parts on engines now, cylinder heads and so forth, you do not want to heat the engine up too much like that. You don't want to. It doesn't take a lot of abuse. You'd rather do what I suggest and get someplace safe where you can shut it off. Because if you don't and you overheat it for too long of a period of time, you're going to be buying a new engine.
So how much time do you think? I know that's tough to say, but just ballpark.
Generally, in my experience, having done this many times, it can give you 5 to 7 minutes. And that's, of course, in my experience. So if you got a lot smaller of a car with a little tiny radiator and a little tiny engine, I'd maybe 5 minutes,
Okay, so the next one is, what do you do when your car won't start? Now, I know that sounds like a basic thing, but there could be a lot of different issues that's causing that to happen.
Well, in most cases, you call AAA. But if you really want to, okay, I'll just...
Thanks for that. Thanks for that well thought out answer.
Okay, I hope we got a minute, because this brings up a very good point that you just asked, because it's very interesting about when people call me and say, my car won't start. Pretend your car won't start, Bob, and I ask you, okay, Bob, does it make any noise? Well, when I hit the key, it makes a noise, but it doesn't start. Okay, what kind of a noise does it make? Well, that grinding sound. No, I don't know that grinding sound. What I'm trying to convey is, let's take a simple step that will help people immensely. When you call someone and say your car won't start, if you've ever been out of gas in a car, if you've ever had a car that won't start because it's out of gas, it will crank over, the starter will engage, the engine will turn, it'll go it will what we call turn over or crank over. That's a very good term to understand, because there's a big difference between a car that won't start. When you're asked, will it turn over and not start, like it's out of gas, okay? Or will it not even crank over? In other words, you hit the key, it goes click, or you hit the key and it goes, makes some kind of other noise, but it doesn't actually turn over. There's a huge difference in trying to diagnose something on the phone unless you know a little bit of terminology. So, if the battery's good and the car turns over but just won't start, there's a whole different scenario of possibilities than if you go out there and your car just doesn't do anything, like the battery's dead. Then we go on to check for electrical things, like, do your headlights work? If the car doesn't do anything, you would want to know, do we have any power in that battery at all? Turn the headlights on. Go out front. Do the headlights light up? Because so many times you can have situations where, say, the starter is bad, or the starter relay is bad, or it is a anti-theft problem. So if the battery's good, and you turn the headlights on and they're good and strong, now we have another road to go down. And there's all kinds of these issues that come up with what does the car do exactly? And that is when a technician or a mechanic or brother-in-law, whoever you're talking to, can help you try to understand what possibly you need to do and maybe get you out of a tough situation. You know, Bob, many times we've seen where cars won't start because of the anti-theft system has activated for some unknown reason, and nobody knows why, but it'll do what it's supposed to do, and that's keep the car from starting.
Well, I remember one time it was a Sunday, and I went out to start my car, and it wouldn't start. And you go, have you checked the battery and the key? And that, sure enough, was what the problem was.
Yeah.
And I would have never thought about that.
And, you know, speaking of that, another good point. Sometimes if you're trying to get your car to start and you can answer some of the questions about, okay, does it crank over? No. Does it try to crank over? Does it make any noise? No. All right. Little known fact is a lot of times if your key fob is the cause of your anti-theft system kicked in, activated, and prevents you from starting the car, you can put the remote or the key fob itself right up to the button. If you got a push button starter, you actually push the button with the remote, and it will start. It'll bypass the dead battery. So a lot of people don't know that. You know, I mean, that's just something that gets you out of a bind. Now you got to go to Kroger and get a battery on the way home, though. You know, by the way, that's another thing.
I've never heard, doing however many shows we've done together, 20-something years, I don't think I've ever heard that as a tip.
Yeah, you can put the remote, the key fob, right up to the button and actually push the button with the fob. And oftentimes that'll allow the car to start and get you out of a bind. You know, you can get home from wherever you're not supposed to be at that point.
1-877-913-5357. This is Bob Brooks. We are up against the break. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hello, this is Bob Brooks. Proverbs 22:3 and Proverbs 27:12 are the exact same verse word for word. I call them the stewardship verses of risk. A prudent person foresees danger and takes precautions. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. On the Prudent Money Radio Show, we teach about risk, how to identify it, how to figure it out, and what to do about it. We believe that to be a prudent steward, you have to be a good risk manager. Listen to the Prudent Money Radio Show on Bible School Radio 91.3. Prudent Money, home of the modern-day steward movement.
Hi, I'm Jan Markell, host of Understanding the Times. We're very excited to be a part of Bible School Radio. I hope you will join me Saturday, 10 a.m., for cutting-edge guests and the latest information to help you discern the truth, even the inconvenient truth. We'll help you understand our times and contend for the faith. That's Understanding the Times, Saturday at 10 a.m., right here on Bible School Radio or anytime at olivetreeviews.org.
Spiritual decline isn't unique to this era. Continuing a study in the book of Jude, we will discover why the greatest threat to our faith comes from within the church. We'll hear about the dangers of deception and learn how to identify false teachers. That's this week on Truth for Life with Alistair Begg.
Weekdays at 5:30 a.m. here on 91.3 KDKR.
Welcome back. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the special Car Corner edition of Prudent Money. 1-877-913-5357 is the number to call, and we do have a line open. So here's one for you, Tony Joe. What happens when your AC stops blowing cold air? What do you do at that point?
Sweat. Get very uncomfortably hot.
Another very well thought out answer.
Hey.
And I call AAA this time, right?
Who's the man? I mean, who's the man with the answers? I know. Okay, so the air conditioner was working a minute ago, or even last night when you came home, and then today you turn it on and it doesn't work. Let me just say that in most cases, that soon of an equipment failure like that more than likely is indicative of an electrical problem, not what we usually would think of as an AC problem. Now, it can be, but in most cases, if you're losing coolant through a Freon leak or the compressor's going bad or you've got some, switch going out, clutch switch, something, it usually doesn't happen immediately. It usually happens slowly over a week's time or maybe longer, so you notice things. When it just doesn't work suddenly, usually you're looking at an electrical issue. Now, there's a lot of things electrically that happen from the minute you push the button for the air conditioner to actually turning on the air conditioning compressor, which then produces the cold air that you're requesting. Like what? Well, the button itself is encompassed in a module. Now, that module has a lot of circuitry in it, and the module itself can be bad, not sending a signal to the next step. What I mean by that is if the button itself is not sending power to, say, the pressure switch, which then decides how much pressure is in the system, do we have enough Freon to turn this thing on, or do we have too much Freon or not enough? Well, then it will continue on down the line to, say, the compressor relay. And the relay then has to get a signal from certain places through the communications of other sensors to allow it to turn on. And then the relay will then activate. Now, if that doesn't activate, that can be an electrical issue. If you're turning really sharp on a lot of cars, there's a pressure switch in the power steering that will cut off the compressor on purpose just long enough for you to make that turn because it increases the horsepower that you have available at that moment. When you're trying to turn into the parking spot at Kroger and it's a real tight turn, with the compressor on, it kind of drags the engine down, and with the power steering activated in that tight situation, it needs that horsepower to keep the power steering going. So it'll temporarily cut the compressor out. And that's just some of the things I can think of. There's more. Different cars have different items that will prevent the compressor from coming on. But all these things have to work in a series of events to actually turn on the compressor to get cold air. Any one of them can stop this process. So when it suddenly goes out like that and it's an electrical problem, it needs to be diagnosed. There's an awful lot of complex circuitry from the minute you push the button to the minute you activate the compressor.
Okay, so this is another situation. Probably don't hear or see this happen very often, but what do you do when your exhaust is a different color than normal?
You mean so it's smoking of some kind.
Right,
okay.
Right.
Well, first of all, what color is what you're seeing? Let me just start at the beginning real quick. At night, whenever you come home from work, if you've driven 10, 15 miles and you pull into the garage and you shut your car off, there's a lot of warm air inside of the exhaust pipes, the catalytic converter, the muffler, resonator, and the exhaust manifold. So now this hot air is no longer going anywhere. It's not being forced out the tailpipe. It's just sitting there. As hot air cools down overnight, it squeezes out the moisture in the air. So the moisture in the air is squeezed out, condenses, drops to the bottom of the pipe, exhaust manifold, converter, blah, 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 whatever it is. When you start it in the morning, that's liquid water sitting in the bottom of the exhaust parts. So as soon as that exhaust hits 1,000 degrees or so, what do you think happens to that water? Well, it gets evaporated and it turns to steam. So on a cold morning or sometimes in the morning, you will see a little bit of what you think is white smoke is really steam vapor. And you can always tell because you can even see drops of water coming out the tailpipe sometimes. Perfectly normal. Everything's healthy. That's perfectly normal. It's what it's designed to do. Now we can move on to you're driving down the road and all of a sudden you see this plume of black smoke rolling out of your car. Okay, that's a different situation. We have a problem. We are running way too rich. All that black smoke is carbon, And it is telling you that we've got way too much fuel for the amount of air that's going into that engine. Could be a bad injector. It could be a bad regulator. There's so many things it could be that it's not worth talking about. It has to be figured out, and there's no way to know that on a telephone call or doing it over the radio program. But it tells you something's wrong. It shouldn't be billowing out black smoke. Then we have gray smoke. What does that mean? Gray smoke, that can be kind of similar. It can be fuel too, but it would be not quite as extreme. In other words, a smaller fuel leak getting into the cylinders will create gray smoke. Now, the other form would be white smoke. And again, we're talking about basically steam, but the difference is it's while it's running down the road. Normally, if you see white smoke being produced by the tailpipe, you're going to also experience a car that's not running right. You're going to feel a misfire usually, and that indicates you've got a blown head gasket or an intake manifold gasket that's somehow getting into the engine. The water is turning to steam because of the heat inside the combustion chamber, and it's going out the tailpipe as what you think of as white smoke is probably steam. And at that point, you need to shut it off and get it towed, or you really need to have somebody look at it that knows what they're doing, because that's a pretty serious situation.
Okay, so this next question really has to deal with effort, and I've done this before. Fortunately, it didn't turn out bad. Okay. What do you do when you come outside? It's cold. Of course, can't relate to that today, but it's cold outside, and your windows are frozen. I think your first thought, if you just don't really know, your first thought is, I don't think I want to get an ice chipper or whatever you call it and start chipping off ice. I'd rather just go get some hot water and pour it on the windshield. Why is that such a really bad idea?
Well, because thermal expansion, the windows are not designed to accept that kind of heat difference in heat from, say, a 20-degree day where the windows have ice buildup on them, and then you pour hot water on there, you're liable to just crack the windows. You're liable to crack the side windows, the door handles. If you pour it on the windshield, you're going to crack the windshield. The difference in immediate temperature change like that is not something that you ever want to do. What you probably would be better off doing is to try to chip the ice away. If the door will open, get in and start the car and turn on the heater and the defroster. If the door won't open, do not try to force it open with those plastic door handles that we have now. It just doesn't work. You break them. And it's not just the outside handle part. You can break the internal parts too. So you want to be careful not to really force the car. They just don't make them like they used to, as most people say. So you got to treat them with kid gloves, and you want to chip the ice away at the crack where the door opens so that you can try to get the door open without too much heavy effort, let's say. Because if you, like I said, if you put too much into it, you're going to break the door handles, and that's pretty expensive nowadays. It's not something that you need to do. You can just take an ice chipper. Nobody wants to, but you got to work at it. You got to chip the ice away so the door will open.
Okay, so this is something else I don't think that people really do, and it's a great step to take. You take your car to get it looked at, and they give you an estimate, and it's well over $500. What do you do?
Well, if you don't know enough about an automobile to know whether that estimate is accurate or even fair, my advice at that point would be to get a second opinion. Because I hate to say this, but so many times today I've seen it over and over and over where you get these really big estimates for things on the car that somebody saw just by doing an oil change. Well, these visual things that they've noticed may or may not, in fact, really be necessary items. And a lot of it is judgment call. A lot of times people will look at something and say, that bushing is bad, when in fact, if really put under pressure and exercised, you determine that bushing is still good. It really doesn't need to be replaced. So, having said that, make a long story short, is if you're not sure, if you get a bad feeling, or if you're not knowledgeable enough about cars, you take your car in for an oil change and you come out with an estimate for $1,300 worth of work, you need to get a second opinion before you commit to doing all that.
Yeah,
and my rule, Bob, I know, my rule, we've agreed before, 500 or more is usually the cutoff point.
Yeah, and you gotta have cutoff points someplace. But I always like that answer about the judgment call, because you can look at a set of brakes and one mechanic can say, oh, you get a lot more out of it. The other says, no, that's too dangerous.
Yep.
Hey, this is Bob Brooks. You got a question for me, please go to the website at prudentmoney.com and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.